Our next speaker today, it's actually two speakers. I was in Texas a couple weeks ago at the Texas BBFI meeting and caught up with Jon and Michael Haley. And I got to interview these guys about the hike. You probably heard about the hike they went on with several other guys, raising funds for Manna Worldwide and their feeding centers. And they wrote a book based on that hike. And I was able to ask them several questions and talk through not only the book, but the principles of the book, a little bit about their hike, talking about doing a hard thing. That was a hard thing, and I know you're going to be encouraged by this.
Hey, thanks, Randy. My name's Jon, and I'm excited to be a part of this video cast.
Hey, my name is Michael, and man, we are excited to share with you our journey through writing a book and taking the long journey on the JMT.
So you may be wondering what our book is about. Randy gave you some basic information, but we went on a hike in 2019, and really the main focus of the hike was to raise money for Manna Worldwide. Of course, Bruce is a member of my church, and he's always scheming with big ideas and what to do. And so when we first got introduced to this challenge, really, I think we were kind of on a mission trip together. And honestly, I wasn't as interested as my brother was. So I'll kind of let him explain what kind of got his juices flowing for it.
Yeah, we were in Havana, Cuba, just checking out some of the Manna works and how Manna could get involved there. And I remember we were on a bus riding through the streets of Cuba there, and Andrew happened to be sitting next to me. There were some other pastors and missionaries on the bus, and he showed me a picture. He said, "Hey man, would you like to hike the John Muir Trail?" I said, "I don't know what that is, but yeah, sure."
I had no idea what it was either.
And so he showed me a picture that had, I think it was 44,000 in elevation, and so there's 12 peaks. Or passes, you might want to call them, and 44,000 feet of elevation through this trail. And the idea was to raise money for Manna Worldwide. So that's how I was introduced to the idea, and I was all in, sitting there on that bus in Cuba.
And for me, you know, being that we're twins, we're very competitive and always had a competition in everything. And so once he kind of committed that he was going to do it, I was challenged that I need to do it. And of course, I love Manna, and I love their purpose and really reaching kids from the grip of poverty. And so I just want to be a part of that. And then the challenge of the JMT. As he mentioned, I had no idea what the John Muir, I don't even know how to say it, honestly, still, John Muir Trail. And it really goes through 3 national parks in the High Sierras there in California. And of course, Andrew is also a member of my church, and so he just kept feeding me with information. I kept getting excited about it. But honestly, I mean, as we have read through Scripture, one of the other, I guess, purposes for me was I really felt like I wanted to connect with God. Every time I've gone to the mountains, I just felt God's presence. And so that was another, I guess, motivating factor for me to sign up and say, yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah, people ask all the time, why the JMT? Why did you do it? Well, it's because that's what Andrew picked. But for me, why I wanted to do it was I love a good adventure. I always think back to when I was a kid, going to a small donut shop with my dad, and all of the old men sitting in the corner, whether it was maybe at McDonald's or the donut shop, just sharing stories. And so I never want to miss out on an opportunity to have an adventure with some other guys, so that, you know, when I'm old, sitting in the corner drinking some bad coffee at McDonald's, I have stories to tell. And so that was for me, stories to tell and an opportunity to raise money. We were able to do this hike to raise over $100,000 for Manna Worldwide, and many of you helped, so thank you for that. But that was it. I could partner, adventure, and feeding kids that are in the grip of poverty. So why not be a part of that?
One of the, I guess, biggest questions I know probably he get asked too is, how do you train, or what was the hardest part of training for that? Especially for me, because I am in Texas. Of course, he is in Colorado, so his training may have looked a little different from me. So I didn't really have a mountain to go climb. And I think for me, just the challenge, I would walk to work a couple days a week in the Texas heat with the 40-pound pack, then walk back, and it killed my feet, like blister after blister. But because of the training that I did, being where I was at, on the hike, I hardly dealt with that at all, which was not his story.
Yeah, the hardest part about training for me was just questioning myself, am I doing enough?
Yeah.
And there's just no way to know. There's no way to prepare for a hike like that without just doing it. Obviously, you can do what you can do, but you just don't know how your body's going to respond to 17 days of hiking in rough terrain, over mountain passes. So for me, as I say, I had an advantage to most of the guys in the group. I could go out 20 minutes from my house and hike a mountain and throw a backpack on. So for me, the hardest part, I think, was not knowing if I was done enough, and then how do I get the gear? Like, what gear do I need?
Yeah.
I mean, you can over research this. If you've ever done a through hike, man, there's so much information out there, and people are cutting strings off the backpack to save ounces, and what food am I going to take? So that, for me, that was the hardest part. Is just the preparing things that I didn't know how to prepare.
Yeah, because I spent hours and hours trying to figure out, again, all the videos on YouTube of doing a through hike. You have to have your food in a bear canister, and the bear canister's heavy, and then I don't know how many times and you try to weigh your food out, like you need this many calories per this many ounces of weight. And so factoring all that, and how can I carry it in this bear canister, and then trying to figure out how we had to get a pack of mules to bring our food in to resupply on, I think, was it day 7 or 8, something like that? Day 7. And then we had to get another 5-day, I think it was a 3-day resupply that was shipped to another place in California, and just all the figuring out and trying to, can I pack 7 days worth of food in this little bear canister? And so just figuring all that, again, like you said, I'd never done a through hike. I don't think anybody we weren't really smart. So to be honest with you, we went the opposite direction of most people. So there was 14 of us that started it. 5 of them had planned on hiking out on day 5, because we got to summit Mount Whitney, which is the highest mountain in the lower 48, on day 3. We knew quickly that we were in trouble by day 1 as far as our training, but 2 other guys ended up not finishing the hike with us, and we may get into that story in a minute. But just all the planning for that, I had no idea what to do, and so the expectations of what's gonna meet me in California was kind of daunting.
Yeah. So let me ask you this: when you think about the hike, I know you had some struggles that's chronicled in our book as well. What was the hardest part of the hike for you? For those of you who know, the hike was 244 miles, 17 days on the trail. I didn't realize, we didn't know this. I think Andrew hid this information from us. But the first 2 days, the first 20-something miles, weren't even part of the Jon and Trail. Because of the size of our group, we had to hike an extra 20-something miles just to get to the start of the trail. And so what was the hardest part? I mean, you dealt with a lot of things, so...
I think for me it was the mental game, the mental aspect of it, because again, day 1 was 15 miles. We climbed a pass. Day 1 we started at over 10,000 feet. We never got below 10,000 feet till I think day 12, 11 or 12, somewhere in there. And so I remember on the night of day 2, day 3, we were going to hike Mount Whitney, and I don't know if you experienced as much as me. I just had a lot of fear. Because day 2 I started getting sick and was dealing with altitude sickness, didn't really know what it was. But that night, I was sick all night. I think you were too. A lot of guys were. I was nervous. I was scared. I remember hardly sleeping at all. We were a group of us that felt like we were going to be a little slower. We're meeting outside my tent at 4:30 in the morning to start the hike.
That's
I think
too early.
Yeah, it was very early. Well, I think what were we, 7 miles away from Mount Whitney that day, to the peak, and then we had to come back, obviously. And so I remember getting out of my tent, and all night I prayed all night. I felt like I was wrestling with God or Satan or both, and it was just the mental aspect of it. And I got out of my tent with a few of the guys, and I said, "Man, I feel like I wrestled with Satan all night." And a few of the guys said, "Me too." And it was just I don't know, it was a weird spiritual battle, and I just kept telling God, I felt like you wanted me to do this. Give me the strength to do it. I want to sleep, and that didn't really happen. But that was a continual theme all through the hike. Was I just got to fight, to push through, to persevere, to do the hard things like we're talking about, and just even as this new book that's come out from Bruce Garner, be resilient. And so I could name a lot of different moments that were the hardest, but I think it was just the whole trip.
Was there, because I know you wrestled with getting off, and if you don't know, there's only certain spots where you can actually get off. And getting off isn't just like, hey, I'm going to take a 30-minute stroll to the next town. You have to hike over a mountain to get off the trail.
Right.
So I know you wrestled a lot, multiple days. Was there one day or maybe one thing I know you share that kept you going?
Yeah, I think
other than being with me.
Yeah, well,
me carrying your pack.
I say the biggest. Yeah, right. Lonnie did carry my pack for a mile. I'll have to confess openly, one of the longest days. I was totally worn out. We were supposed to camp at this front of the lake. We get a text message through our Garmin satellite device. Michael was walking with me at that time. He was just hanging back with the slow guys, and said, no, we're going to be on the other side of the lake. And I think it was 2 miles extra. Yeah. And it wasn't like, I mean, it sounds like, oh, we got 2 miles around the lake. It was climbing over boulders. It was rocky terrain. It was just, and it was the end of I don't remember 17 miles or something. I don't remember. And my knee gave out. And Lonnie had walked back looking for, whoever might still be out there. And he offered to take my pack, and I told him no. Then I finally gave it to him. So anyways, that was a side note. But I think, honestly, there were many moments when I wanted to get off, I wanted to quit. And I just kept thinking, going back to before the hike, I tore my meniscus 3 weeks before the hike. I was training, I'd been training, and I tore meniscus in my right knee 3 weeks before the hike. I had gotten someone to look at it. They didn't think it was that bad. Oh, it's just, your IT band maybe it needs to be stretched, give it some rest. So I did that for a week, and it didn't get any better. I had the guy look at it again. I remember I was actually on the conference table in my office at church after church one day, and one of the members there who was a trainer checked it out, and I remember the look on his face. That moment I knew, oh, it's not good. And he said, I think you've torn your meniscus. And I'm like, what does that mean? He said, I can get you into a specialist tomorrow, whatever. And so I remember driving to that place and saying, God, I feel like you want me to do this. I want to raise money for kids. I want to have stories when I'm old at the coffee shop. But I feel like you've let me come this far. I want to finish. I want to do it. And this is where we even started. But I resigned to the fact that maybe God didn't want me to. And that I would go to California and do support, whatever that looked like. And anyways, long story short, they gave me a cortisone shot, and here we are 2 years later or so, and I haven't had any problems with it. But there was moments like that. But I remember on the first day, I think it was Dave, I can't remember what day it is. It's in the book. I posted a video on Facebook, and that night went to bed. It was about the only time we had any kind of service. When I woke up that night, the next morning, I had over 100 messages from people all over the country, a lot of people from my church that said, I'm praying for you. And there was this 92-year-old lady from my church that said, you can do it, Pastor Jon, I'm praying for you. And I thought, okay, I can't quit. And so, I don't know, just God continually affirming that this is what I want you to do. And I couldn't let him do it and me not do it. So, how about you? I mean, like Andrew, his trail name was Mountain Goat because he could just keep going, no problem. You obviously had, as far as the altitude and the peaks, more experience probably than the rest of us and more opportunity. But it wasn't easy for you. What was the hardest for you?
For me, it's just, I think it was muscle fatigue and then just the monotony every day. It was like we would wake up almost every morning with the song from Groundhog Day, one of us singing it in a tent, just because it was the same thing every day. And then for my biggest struggle was just blisters. Really nothing you could do about it.
Trust me, you do not want to see the pictures of his feet. Maybe Randy could put them on the video, but
I don't think we want to see
we'll probably lose the audience right there.
Probably children watching, but I know Austin, some of you guys know Austin Crow. I think we had a battle of whose feet were the worst, but for me that was it, just the monotony of, man, it's hard one day, because we all knew it was going to be hard.
Right.
And so, but how is your body going to respond doing the hard thing 17 days in a row? And so for me, that was the hard part, was just getting up, 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, first 30 minutes were in my tent, just putting everything up and trying to doctor my feet so that they can make it through to the end of the day. We had talked a lot about on the trail about writing the book. 'Cause people ask us all the time, well, why the book?
Right.
What is the purpose of the book? So for you, what is maybe the purpose behind it? Writing the book, I Must Go.
I think, before we went on the hike, our dad gave us or told us of a book that said The Mountains Are Calling was the name of the book. And I just went blank. Stevenson, I think, by Stevenson, is that right?
Yeah.
And it was basically about mountaintop experiences in the Bible. And of course, our dad has been a huge influence on our life, still is, spiritual mentor, our pastor, our dad, all those things. And he kind of put it into us like the love of the mountains. He loved to go skiing, and so I think he always equated that to when Moses go up and in the presence of God. And so I've always felt closest to God in nature. And so then kind of thinking, God had allowed you to write a couple books already. I had written one. Maybe we could mesh that love of wanting to tell people about mountaintop experiences in the Bible. And so I read that book, The Mountains Are Calling, and the rest of that quote from John Muir is, I must go. And so we, early on, before we went, thought, man, how cool would it be to have a book that chronicles our story. We didn't really know what that was going to look like at the time, but then also point people to God is desperately calling people on a journey. And so that's what, that was kind of my motivating factor. And Michael was able, I was sick a lot on the hike, and I was just trying to get through. I had altitude sickness from like day 2 to, I don't remember, day 12 or something. But Michael was able to just really talk through it and pray through it. And then even, what was kind of your motivating factor for wanting to, because I feel like you were more of a driving force of the book being written than I was.
I just wanted to encourage people, because one of the things I learned through the book that Jarrett Stevens had written was that God is calling us. And so when we go to the mountaintop experiences, because we all know what that means in the Christian world, but also in the valleys. I remember I was able to, while we were on the hike, to do videos. And they're basically intro videos to each chapter of our book. So we have a website that's set up if you want to do like a small group study through it. And so
I think it'd be a great men's study, and the videos that he did were just awesome.
So there's 12 mountain passes, and so on each pass, I was able to record a short video just to kind of set up the chapter, set up the study for that day, and then there's discussion questions go along with it. We want just to encourage people that when God calls you to something, that you're willing to make the sacrifice, to do the hard things, to make the climb. But it's not just making the climb to experience God or to see God in a new way, but it's when you come down the mountain that you're willing to encourage and inspire other people. Because just to go on a hike, that's not really encouraging, it's not really inspiring. But the way we were able to see God work and the way that God carried us through those, and just, man, I just remember being in the nature and thinking, man, because you can't see the places we were at unless you are willing to make the sacrifice to get there. And it's not easy. All the planning and the preparation. And so to be able to see some of God's creation that most people will never see was inspiring to me. And while we were on the hike, there's a lot of things that we learned that helped us in writing that book. And for me, one of those is just that the God of the mountain is the same God in the valley. And there's a song by Hillsong that says, where you are, that's where the mountain is. It's like, and God, you are the same God. Because I think sometimes we want God to do these miraculous things, and we miss him in the mundane things. And so I wanted to inspire and encourage you to, when God calls, whatever it takes, I'm gonna jump out and I'm gonna go for it. Because even in those moments, you think to like fellowship meetings, when we meet in Springfield, we meet at those different fellowship meetings in the BBFIs, that, man, I want to be able to get with all the pastors that I went to college with, and I've grown to love over the years, and share stories, spiritually speaking, of what God has done in our lives.
Well, I think when you were talking, made me think, and this may be hard to answer, and I'm kind of throwing this at you, but how did your expectation of the moments with God on the mountain, how did they compare to the reality of the moments with God on the mountain?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think we all had this idea that every night we were going to get to camp, build a bonfire, and
we were going to sing Kumbaya, of course.
And tell stories. And that happened maybe 3 times on the trail, because by the time you got to your tent set up, you were just ready to go to bed. And I took a journal, and there's one entry, day 1.
I took a journal, but I left it somewhere on day 12 because I was tired of carrying things. I had no idea.
There's one entry in my journal, other than the notes that I took on my phone for the videos that I was doing, because it was just, and it's kind of related to life. We get so busy in life and so exhausted that we just don't enjoy, we don't abide or sit in the presence of God. And I was guilty of that on the trip because I was just tired.
Right.
I don't even know where that journal is, because it was day 1. This is gonna be great.
It's the best ever.
And that was the last entry in that journal, because it was hard.
I think for me, it's pretty much the same experience, but I really went. We're both 47, right? 47 now. We're like 45 when we're
48.
Yeah, 48. That's right. Dang. We were like thinking, from age 45 to 70 should be in our situation, our stage of life, in our ministry, we should have the most impact and influence in that span of years, probably than ever. And because of our experience, which means we're old, and just our influence, time because of our family, all those things. So I really went with the expectation of, I'm going to hear from God every moment, every day, every night. And if you get the book and read it, you'll see that that's not at all the case. I came back with one thought that I felt like God just impressed on me. And it really is, I think, applicable to this do hard things. And it was this, that it's only going to get harder. And shortly after we get back, the new year rolls around and COVID hits. But I remember coming back and feeling like I've got to have a conversation with my wife, because I was convinced God was saying ministry is going to be harder. And so me and Joy just kind of had this come to Jesus moment of like, I told her, I said, this is the only thing God has told me on the trip that's going to get harder. So you and I need to make a decision. Are we going to stick it out? Are we going to be resilient? Are we going to do the hard thing? Are we going to stay in this? And if not, let's get out now. And that night we just kind of both recommitted to ministry and to God's calling in our life. And it's been true. Yeah. It's just been harder. I think one quote I'll leave with last night in Bruce Garner's message, we're here in Texas at the Texas meeting. He said, speaking of resilience, he said, ministry is going to get harder, so we got to get stronger. And that just kind of was with me about, that's what this was about. How about you? Could you summarize what's the greatest takeaway?
For me, it was, I don't know, I'm trying to, as far as summing that up, day 10, I remember it was going to be a really long day. And so we got up at 5:30. We started a hike with headlamps and going down the trail. And man, spirits were up. We were excited because we were going into what they call MTR, which is Mule Trail Ranch. And
we were going to get some real food,
not
this is gonna be dehydrated.
First time of food in 10 days.
Shower.
But on the way there, man, morale was high at 5:30. But by 10 o'clock, we were crashing. I know you were hurting pretty bad, and so I was through the Garmin thing. I texted my wife and I was like, "Hey, can you find a cabin or something? We need something." And so thankfully, God provided. There was 3 cabins available that we could all fit into, and so we got there. We got to wash our clothes, even outside in a bucket of soap, and take a shower. There was a hot springs pool there, and
that was amazing.
That was like, wow, man! I could go on and on about that experience, but to not have taken a shower for 10 days was a new experience for me. I don't know about you.
Longest I had gone is 9.
At least since middle school, maybe. But, so we were in there, and I was able to just wash my blisters, my feet, and thinking about in this creation, this outdoor hot springs. I just can imagine, and with God, the way that I think sometimes we lose the joy of the mountain because we forget how hard the valley is.
Right.
When we come to God and we see the glory of God and we understand how depraved we are and how dirty and filthy we are, I think the longer you serve in churches, the longer you're a pastor, the longer you're a Christian, you lose sight of that. And I was just reminded as I was washing myself off, I'm thinking of, man, the glory of God, that he would take vessels like us and allow us to be used by him. And so just being willing to take those steps of faith. And I think the reason why people are not willing to do hard things, to take steps of faith is the fear of the unknown. Because that was the biggest thing for me this hike, is it's like the fear of the unknown. And people would say over and over, you're going to get your trail legs, you're going to get your trail legs, you know, and I was like,
I never got my trail legs.
Yeah, for me, about day 4 or 5, I quit when I was rolling setting my tent up and in the tent at night. I quit worrying about my hamstrings locking up because my legs had gotten used to it.
Right.
And
mine
so,
did not.
Yeah. So for me, that was what I would say, the trail legs. And faith is an exercise.
Right.
And I think that people don't take enough steps of faith to get their trail legs.
Yeah, that's true.
The more you walk in faith, I don't know if I'd say the easier it is, but the easier it gets because there's that faith memory or that muscle memory.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. It's like because of God's past faithfulness and looking back where he's brought you to, and every step of faith has exercised, it has strengthened. But just because your faith is strengthened doesn't also mean that the next step isn't just as difficult. Because it's another exercise in faith. It's another step of faith. And I think, I would agree with you 100%. I think another reason people don't do hard things is because they do things alone and they're in isolation. And we won't have time. You can read the book going into what happens when you're in isolation and you give up. And so for me, it was like there was a couple days when I was by myself a lot, and then Michael actually started hanging back with me because I was I wasn't as slow as some of the ones behind, but I couldn't keep up with the pace in front, and just having someone walk with you, and I think that's the importance of this. One of the importance of this fellowship is to know you're not alone. And if you're watching this and you feel like you're alone, hey, give one of us a call, give us an email, text us, whatever, because God has called you to where you are for a purpose right now, in this time, in this place. And so don't do it alone. Don't live in isolation because, you know the scripture that Satan is a roaring lion seeking. He's looking for the isolated one. He's looking for the one. And so take a step of faith. Call someone if you're feeling alone. Now, honestly, I never had an aspiration of writing books, but my brother did. And as I mentioned earlier, there's this twin competition. Well, if he did it, I did it. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to read I Must Go. As he said, there's videos that you can get a link to. There's questions in that a chaplain in Germany had put together, and it would be a great challenging men's study. But what's the first book, and then maybe some other books that you've written?
First book I wrote was called Positioning Your Life for Breakthrough, and it's just looks at the life of David. David, at one point in 2 Samuel, he comes to God and says, "Hey, should I go after the Philistines?" God says yes, so he went, and he called the place Baal Perazim, which is the God who bursts through. And so it just goes through 5 things that how we can position our life, that if God chooses to break through, he'll break through.
It's a great book, by the way. Get it and read it.
The other one is called Who Told You That? 8 Lies That Rob Us of Truth, and it really deals with identity in Christ, and then just kind of the 8 different lies that we believe of Satan. And then the last one that I wrote, really inspired by your daughter and one of my other nieces, and then my little daughter McKenna. And so it's probably not going to learn any theology, super deep theology, but does a princess have to wear a dress? So maybe not the right audience for that book, but if you have daughters or granddaughters.
Hopefully, men, you're not wearing a dress.
That's right. How about you? Share the books you've
Yeah,
written?
so I always have a passion, like all of us as pastors do, for the family. And so the first book I wrote was just really years and years of being a youth ministry and a family ministry, and it's entitled Fight for Your Family. And it's just a goal for as parents and us as pastors as parents to make sure that we capture the heart of our children. And so it's really based on Nehemiah, and he said, fight, like fight for your family. And so The second one was I Must Go, and then I just recently wrote a book called Risk, called Dare to Embrace the Heart of God, and it just goes through the story of Jonah. And the more I read the story of Jonah, the more I see myself and how easy it is to stop taking risk, stop doing the hard things. And so, hey, I hope you've been encouraged. I, again, want to say publicly to my brother, thank you for the challenge and even hanging back with me so we can get through the trail together, and the challenge to write books, and just an encouragement you've been to me.
Yeah, you too. I appreciate you and your ministry, and I'd encourage you, if you're watching this, if you stayed with us for the whole 30 minutes, make sure you're willing to take the risk. If God says come, that you're going to say, I must go, and I'm going to do hard things. Whatever he's speaking to you, just do it. You won't regret going up the mountain and seeing him.